Okay guys, so in this video, there's going to be no math. It's just a little recap of what we did. So what we know about sample proportions. So remember, sample proportions was our p hat, right? So what do we know about it? So there's three different things that we can do: central limit theorem, confidence intervals, and hypothesis testing, right? So how do we know which one we use? So this will hopefully help delineate a couple things, right? So central limit theorem, the key word is sample proportion. So if you see the word sample proportions anywhere, like find the probability that the sample proportion is greater than this, then you know that we need to use central limit theorem. Confidence interval, you will probably see construct a confidence interval, right? So this is when we're going to use this thing, okay? Hypothesis testing, I will either tell you construct a test, or something that deals with tests, or I will give you a significance level. This is how we know we use hypothesis testing, right? Why do we need them? Well, we use central limit theorem to find the probability of a sample proportion occurring. So the central limit theorem actually helps us find the p-value for hypothesis testing, right? So that's our step number 2 when we do steps 1 through 3 in hypothesis testing, right? So that's why we do it, right? The assumptions, make sure that it has to be large enough, right? The way that we know that it's large enough, we need to make sure that n times p is greater than or equal to 10. N times 1 minus p is greater than or equal to 10 also. If it's not this, then we cannot use central limit theorem. So we stop and we say we cannot do it. And here is p hat, the distribution, the mean, and the standard error, right? So it really depends on what the shaded region is. So if p hat was right here, and we were looking at this area, then we would use normal CDF to figure out what this area is, for example. Okay. Confidence intervals, we don't know p. I don't know what the population proportion is, so we use p hat to construct an interval, right? So we have a lower bound and an upper bound, right? So we want to figure out an interval, and the interval actually is formula number 1, which I have it over here. This is the formula that we use. I didn't have any space, so I would put it there, but I didn't have space. This is the formula that we use, right? We know what p hat is. Z star is going to be one of these bottom portions, right? So one of these values, right? Depending on what confidence I want, right? So we don't know what p is. We use the interval to figure out where exactly is p. We need normality for that in a large sample, so similar to this thing, right? And we use formula number 1 to solve it, okay? Hypothesis testing, we construct the test, significance level, those are the keywords. Why do we need them? We need to make a claim, right? We make a claim and test it if it's true and false, right? So I give you my null and I'll give you my alternative. Well, do we reject the null or do we accept it? So if we accept it, or do we reject it, okay? Assumptions are still the same thing, right? And here are the steps. Steps 1 through 3 are down here. So I've wrote this down many different times in class, right? So the first step, we identify the null and the alternative hypothesis, right? Figure out what H0 and HA is. Then we collect the data and use the central limit theorem to find the probability, right? So we collect the data, right? So we find our p hat, whatever our p hat is. Then based on our p hat, we use the central limit theorem, right? So all of this thing to figure out what is the probability of p hat occurring, right? If you have a two-tailed test, you multiply it by 2. Okay, and then after that, once we find our p-value, we compare it with the significance level alpha, and this is usually given to you. So if the p-value is low, we reject it, right? So we say that we have sufficient evidence to support our claim. If the p-value is greater than alpha, then we fail to reject it. So we cannot reject the null, so we don't have enough evidence, okay? So you can pause the video at any time that you want during this thing. So if there's anything that you need, this will be really useful, even if you want to put it in your cheat sheet to know when do I use this, when do I use this, when do I use this, right? So I put some arrows here because I couldn't quite fit everything in one page. So this will be something that will be useful for when we take our exam. So yeah, so if this is just all I wanted to talk about for the first video, okay?